In Climate Watch, as the Earth continues to warm, climate disasters are becoming more common. New polling by CBS News shows a majority of Americans support taking immediate action to address climate change. About 20% said it doesn't need to be addressed at all. And nearly half of those surveyed believe the U.S. should lead international climate efforts. Meanwhile, the White House is marking Earth Day this week by hosting international leaders for a virtual climate summit. No leader from Central America was invited, though, even though climate change is driving people to leave some Central American countries and make their way to the U.S. So Cara Korte is with us now to discuss the potential impacts. Thanks for joining us. Listen, you wrote about this in a recent CBSNews.com article, and I think sometimes people may not associate climate change with migration. It seems like two totally different things, especially because often when we talk about migration, we focus on other factors like poverty or crime in the country that they're fleeing from. But can you talk to us about how climate change and migration are connected?
Yeah, and those attributes, Anne-Marie, poverty and crime, they're all connected to climate change. Now, when we know that the world is getting warmer because emissions are going unmitigated, that warmth means that storms are more destructive, more powerful. We also know that drought is more severe. It's really about its impact on extreme weather. And when you focus on Central America, it's a great microcosm for how climate and national security and climate change and immigration are all related. So in Central America, in November of last year, the region was hit with two devastating hurricanes, two Category 4 hurricanes in the span of 2 weeks, Hurricanes Eta and Iota. And that just devastated the region. More than 600,000 people were displaced in Central America. In Honduras alone, nearly 80% of its agricultural sector was destroyed. And the reason why that matters is because in these Central American nations, the people that are most at risk of climate change are these agrarian agriculture communities, because when a hurricane comes in, it can devastate their economy. It's not only destroys their homes, but they no longer can make a living. And what makes Central America unique when you talk to climate experts, but also refugee and immigration experts, is that in these countries, they're so violent. They're some of the most violent and turbulent in the world. When these rural communities are displaced, they don't want to move into the city because they don't think they can make a living, and it's also so dangerous. So what these Central Americans, climate migrants, climate refugees do is they end up coming to America because they believe that it's safer. They also believe there's more opportunity here. So that just shows how it's all interconnected. That extreme weather can drive migrants thousands and thousands of miles all the way up to the U.S. southern border.
Really good explainer. In a press conference last month, Mr. Biden blamed former President Trump for not giving enough aid to Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, the countries that make up what they call the Northern Triangle when weather disasters happen. What aid could be beneficial, and how can it impact migration?
Well, that question, Anne-Marie, is something that no one really has a succinct answer to because, as we just talked about, it's such a complicated, interconnected issue. Now, in February, President Biden signed an executive order that would give $4 billion over the course of 4 years dedicated to finding the root causes of this migration crisis. They're calling it the root causes strategy. It's something that he's appointed Vice President Kamala Harris with heading up. She's the leader of trying to figure out what is going on here and how do we solve it. So it's an exploratory kind of committee at this point. We know that America and Central American countries, particularly the Northern Triangle, are having bilateral conversations about this. So they're trying to figure it out. But $4 billion over the course of 4 years, I think, kind of explains how big of a problem this is.
So as we mentioned in the introduction to you, President Biden's going to be hosting a virtual climate summit this week. There are 40 international leaders that have been invited. None of them are from Central America. If they had been invited, if Central American leaders had been invited, what sort of impact would it have had on the meeting? I imagine that there's sort of a whole conversation that's not going to happen now because they're not there.
That's exactly the question I found myself asking, Anne-Marie. Obviously, the United States, has to stop the RSVP list somewhere, right? So I just kind of wondered, after hearing the president particularly say, we know that climate refugees are coming to the United States, why not include these folks at the table to begin these dialogues? The response I got from the White House, they kind of pointed me back to that executive order saying that we're having bilateral, more specific conversations with these countries. I reached out to the Salvadorian, Guatemalan, and Honduran embassy, only heard back from the Guatemala embassy here in the United States. They gave a similar answer. The White House is also saying that this summit that's taking place on Thursday and Friday is really focused on the major players. 17 of the 40 countries that are invited are responsible for 80% of the world's emissions, and most of that comes from China, the United States, and the European Union. So they're really focusing on what can be done on this emissions side of the issue. Experts I spoke to, climate refugee experts I spoke to, who are very familiar with the Central American region and the turbulence there, told me that they actually weren't surprised to see that the Northern Triangle wasn't included. And one thing I thought was really interesting about that was one expert told me that when you look at the Western Hemisphere countries that are invited, 8 of the 40 come from the Western Hemisphere, which doesn't sound like a lot, but the Western Hemisphere only accounts for 18% of the world's populations. So I think that's kind of why, the White House says they had to cap it somewhere, and so we're not going to see those Northern Triangle nations included in this summit later this week.
Interesting. Cara, thank you so much.
Thanks, Anne-Marie.
So you can check out Cara's full article just by heading to cbsnews.com right now. And if you want to learn more about the effects of climate change and adaptation, you can watch the CBSN Originals documentary, Adapt or Die: Can Evolution Outrun Our Climate Change? Stream it anytime you want at cbsnews.com/adapt.